kind of a funny preacher story to tell you about kind of an overambitious preacher out in a rural area, and decided to call on some folks that he hadn't been seeing at church much. And so he visits this farmer and his wife, well out in the country, very remote rural area, Mr. Jones and his wife, just to see how they were doing, and maybe kind of light a little fire under them, maybe to come to church. So he's out there one day, and Mr. Jones is out working in around the yard and property, and so he says, just gets right into it. He says, I'm wondering, Mr. Jones, if you're ready for the resurrection. Are you ready for the resurrection? And Mr. Jones says, well, I don't know, when's it coming? When's it going to happen? And preacher says, could be today, could be tomorrow, could be the day after that. Mr. Jones says, well, don't tell my wife. She don't get out much, she'll want to go all 3 days. So I thought I'd put another one. This is an old one, right? I always get a kick out of it. So the preacher asked him, well, do you ever think about the hereafter, Mr. Jones? Do you ever reflect on the hereafter? Think about that. Mr. Jones thinks a minute. He goes, well, preacher, I do. Every time many of the time, I go out to the barn, or I go into the kitchen, and I stand there and I think, what I got in hereafter? All right. So the resurrection, we get the drum roll or something. Resurrection is the key word for the day, and I kind of took radical resurrection as my title. This is really a time of radical resurrection. Life coming back from apparent barrenness, and it turns to glorious color and greenery all around us. It's fabulous. We've been in the last several weeks working a little bit with Charles Fillmore's Keep It True Lenten lessons about leading up to this full resurrection of our whole selves, spirit, body, mind. This is what he says about resurrection and what it meant to Charles Fillmore. He said, every time we rise to the realization of eternal indwelling life, making union with divine mind, the resurrection of Christ takes place in us. All thoughts of limitation are left in the tomb. The resurrection is the raising up of the whole self, spirit, soul, and body, into the Christ consciousness of life and wholeness. Resurrection principle, the potential of every moment. Could be today, could be tomorrow. In fact, it's going on all the time. This resurrection energy at work within us and all around us. And spring is a glorious time to take note of that and to remember it's in us too. We are connected to that. I heard a story, someone told me about, they had some friends, acquaintances from Russia come over to visit. And they came from an area in Russia where there were only evergreen trees. And they came to the Midwest in winter time or early spring, maybe about now before any of the leaves were out. And they said, well, what a shame. What's happened here that all your trees are dead? They'd never been to an area with deciduous trees that come into leaf in the spring. And it's true how dead they all look. I'm always particularly amazed by the redbud trees we have nearby, where the purple flowers come right out of the bark of the seemingly dead tree, and it comes back to glorious life. There's a resurrection energy at work in us at all times, too, just as there is in nature. It's a principle of life. Things coming back to life that you thought were dead, and they really weren't. And times when we thought we were stuck and lacking and hopeless or discouraged, and then we're not. This energy arrives in us, around us. Something happens, this resurrection energy. I love this is a contemporary reading from a writer named Molly Fumiya. She says, if we look more closely into life, we will find that resurrection is more than hope. It is our experience. The return to life from death is something we understand at our innermost depths, something we feel on the surface of our skin. We have come back to life not only when we start to shake off a shroud of sorrow that has bound us, but when we begin to believe in all that is still endlessly possible. When we get back that sense of possibilities. So how does it happen then? If we agree that there's a resurrection principle, we've been brought back to life before, that this is something that's happening in our midst, how does it happen exactly? How do participate in that process? Do we orchestrate our own resurrection? My sense is, from my experience, is that God does the work. God does the work. We participate, we cooperate. To use an old word, we surrender. But surrender in the sense of cooperation. We don't block it. We don't say no to it. We don't refuse it. We don't put up barriers to it. When God is trying to reach us and guide us out of darkness, we say, I'm coming, I'm ready, and we follow it. We cooperate with that energy. And that's the core message, it seems to me, of the Easter stories in the Bible. And it's the core message in, I suspect, churches across the country today. The core message of Easter is that there is no despair, no darkness, no lack or limitation so dense that God can't find us in it. And that resurrecting energy lift us up out of it. And it's going on all the time, in our lives, in each other's lives, in little ways and big ways. Sometimes it seems like little things, and yet the power of a little thing can change a life. Certainly had experiences with that myself. I was reflecting on my little daily resurrections down through the years, and I was remembering, for instance, a time in my early 20s, a time I was in graduate school at the time at OSU, and dealing with a lot of depression, a lot of chronic worry, a lot of not sleeping well, a lot of not feeling well, a lot of stress, a sense of overwhelming stress. And my mother happened to be looking for a magazine she couldn't find most places, a little magazine called The Science of Mind. And it wasn't one you could find on most bookstore magazine racks. You had to be kind of a subscriber already, and neither one of us was yet. So somebody directed me from the Unity bookstore in Columbus to a little Science of Mind church on North High Street in the Clintonville area, and said, I think you could probably get it at their bookstore over there. So I wander in on a Sunday after church, I think, and open the door, and as I go in, I open another door to the sanctuary, and there's a circle of prayer going on, a silent meditation being led by a minister who looked more like a linebacker than a preacher, and there was a palpable peace emanating from the sanctuary, wafting out the door at me. Have you ever been greeted by a sort of waft of peace? It was coming out at me, and I got the magazine, and I went home with it. And then I started attending that church. I had been touched by that peace somehow, inspired by it to make a change. And I began attending that church regularly, and soon I was their newsletter editor and usher. And after a while, anything else that needed to be done in a small church, as many of you well know, there's always a lot to do. And it began to take classes and to practice meditation and begin to learn to manage my mind. Begin to learn to manage my mind, which of course is what meditation practice is all about, and reading and studying. God knew my need before I did. I didn't know what I was in need of, but I was guided there that morning by seeming coincidence. Seeming coincidence, when I opened a door, there happened to be a meditation going on. We have coincidences like this happen in our lives often, don't we? That's what I mean, God does the work. That's the source of it. I didn't make that happen. I didn't work out those details. God loves a good coincidence. Have you ever noticed that God loves a good coincidence? I heard a wonderful story. I read a wonderful story about a man I always admired. I saw him on, I think, a 60 Minutes program. He was in the news a good deal before he passed several years ago. A man named Dr. Fred Epstein. He's a pediatric neurosurgeon. He had a brilliant career. He worked out of a place called Beth Israel Medical Center in New York, and he did more than 2,500 surgeries during his career, many of them on spinal cords and brain stems of children that were previously thought inoperable, and he found a way to do a lot of these surgeries and save a lot of lives. And the way many of them happened were by such remarkable coincidences and happenstances and meetings. God works in powerful ways, especially if we're ready to go with it. Use me, I'm ready to serve, direct me to those who need. He seemed to work that way in his life. And so there's a wonderful story about how he did, within the space of a week, he did a surgery on a little pug dog and a little boy within a week. and both lives were saved, kind of by an amazing series of happenstances. This veterinarian called him out of the blue, a vet named Nancy Brown, who a wealthy couple had brought their little pug dog in because something was wrong with the pug, and he had lost the ability to move his back legs, his balance, and they were very upset and trying to save their beloved pug. They had 3 of them. His name was Tucket, and they consulted everywhere. They consulted with the vet, and she did research. She tried to find other veterinary surgeons who might tackle the problem. Nobody would. She thought it was inoperable. They were quite wealthy. They were ready to spend anything to save their little doggie. She said, the only thing I can think of is I've got this friend. He's actually a pediatric neurosurgeon, and I'll check with him. So the vet checks with Dr. Epstein, and he first gives some names of other surgeons that might do it, but nobody would do it. So he said, okay, well, I'll do it if this family that owns Tucket, the pug dog, will donate enough money to Save One Child program going to cover the expenses of a pediatric neurosurgery, which was an incredible expense, one of those surgeries, for a family who couldn't afford it. So the family said, the McCauslins said, we'd be happy to do that. So what they do, Dr. Epstein takes all his surgical instruments to the veterinary care center and operates on little Tucket there. And he said it was not a difficult surgery from his perspective. The only thing was the distraction of barking coming from other surgeons. But he carried on and did the surgery on Tucket. The very same day that surgery was going on, a little boy's family, Jerry Martin, he was a 5-year-old and very ill, and his family was from rural Pennsylvania and had no money, and they had difficulty getting the CAT scan to find out what was going on with their son, who had severe headaches and stomachache, and they were told, he had 3 months to live, and they should just try to keep him comfortable. Well, that very day that the dog surgery was going on, Betty Martin, the boy's mother, happened to read in Reader's Digest something about Dr. Fred Epstein doing pediatric neurosurgeries that other people wouldn't. And so they called him. Very same day that the doggie was getting his surgery, they call, and Dr. Epstein, knowing he's got a big old donation just came in, said, bring Jerry down tomorrow. So they drove down 5 hours to New York City and operated on him within several days, and both Jerry, the 5-year-old surgery, and Tucket, the pug dog surgery, were successful. And a year later, they all came together because everyone wanted to meet everybody. And the McCauslins came in with Tucket the dog, walking on all 4s, to the medical center, and Jerry Martin and his family, and they all got together. I would have loved to have been at that meeting, wouldn't you? All the joy of the lives that were saved by these remarkable coincidences, these little graces that occur, and all we can say is thank you, thank you. We cooperate, we follow. God sort of orchestrates the resurrections in our lives. Sometimes it comes through other people's hands, other people's generosity. I heard a story about someone who she went through a bitter divorce, a difficult time in her life, and she worked at a community health agency of some kind. The pay was pretty low, and she was struggling to carry on and take care of her daughter. She was almost divorced, and her daughter was staying with her almost ex-husband for a long weekend. And she gets home from work on, I think, a Thursday evening and finds an eviction notice on her apartment door. And told she has 3 days to get out. And she goes in and her power's off, and it's cold, and she spends this hopeless night, this desperate night, and thinking of her ex-husband telling her she wasn't going to be able to make it, to take care of her and her daughter, and fearful, wondering what to do. Next day she goes into work. It's a Friday. She doesn't have any clue what she's going to do, and she is putting a good face on it, as she tended to do. But she looked like somebody who hadn't slept, and a colleague came in and said, "What is going on?" And she fessed up. She shared what was going on with her in the situation. which was kind of uncustomary for her. The colleague said, I'm going to talk to somebody else because I think we have a friend working upstairs who needs somebody to room with them, to live in their house. That other colleague did indeed need someone to take the bedroom areas upstairs. They had lost a tenant, they needed someone to live up there, or they couldn't afford their house. Divine match-up, kind of an amazing kind of resurrection story, isn't it? Over 3 days, a little army of friends and colleagues moved her into her new home, and her daughter came home to a cozy new dwelling. By the grace of God, these amazing resurrecting moments in our lives that can reach us in so many ways, coincidences, little acts of generosity and kindness. And there's no limit to it, really. How these, the barriers that they can cross, how they can reach us in all kinds of situations, whether we are alone or with others. One more little story I wanted to share. When I lived in the Clintonville area of Columbus, I had an elderly friend named Valia, who I had met doing some hospice volunteer work, and when her husband passed. And then I ran into her at my local grocery store, where I went pretty much every week, and she was waiting on a cab out front, looking really weary and leaning on her cart and waiting for a taxi. Well, I knew she lived only a few blocks away from me, so I offered her a ride home, and then we just started going to the store together every Saturday. So for some time, a couple of years, I sort of tracked her progress, and it was hard. She and Arnold were very, very tight. They had come from Latvia together. They had come through a lot, and she was pretty lost without him, and it was hard, and I could tell it was really hard. And I got over one Saturday to pick her up, and she looked almost gleeful as she told me about an experience she'd had earlier that week, that she'd been sitting in her regular sitting chair with her head back against the back of it, feeling very weary and really wishing she could go and join Arnold, and very tired. And she was probably pushing 90 at about that age, 88, 89. But while she was sitting there feeling this way, all of a sudden she looked up and she saw Arnold's face in a little glowing cloud above her head. And you can believe that or not, I sure believed it. She saw it. And the proof is in the pudding, as always with these experiences. The joy she felt, the peace she felt, the encouragement she felt that she could go on. She saw her deceased husband's face above her, smiling at her. And she found she could carry on a little bit longer. She lived a few more years after that. It's amazing, the variety and incredible ways God can find to resurrect us out of feelings of lack and limitation, resurrect us out of poverty, resurrect us out of stress and depression and need and discouragement. And I bet if we did a little group discussion afterwards, we would hear many, many resurrection stories in this very room. There is a powerful energy of resurrection in us all, flowing through us at all times, available to us at all times. And our role is to be alert for it and ready to follow it, ready to receive it, ready to follow it, ready to give thanks for it, and stay in touch with the flow of it, because there's going to be more. There's going to be more as we have need of it. The resurrecting power of God is at work in me now. Let me say that once more, and maybe we can say it together then. The resurrecting power of God is at work in me now. Once more. The resurrecting power of God is at work in me now. Let's take that truth into prayer for a moment. Affirm that in the quiet of prayer. In this moment, in every moment, there is this power and presence in us that is renewing life, that is guiding wisdom, that is steadying peace. It is flowing through us now. It extends far beyond our sight. It brings us into this life and through every challenge within it and takes us beyond it. There are no barriers or obstacles to the resurrecting power of God at work in our midst, and we are connected to it. This is the truth of our being, and we are grateful. And so it is. Amen.